Today we have the familiar lesson of Gideon, but it focuses on the encounter he had with the angel of the Lord to set the stage for a great victory for Israel. Like Barak in last week's lesson, Gideon was a judge who was timid. Again, Israel had fallen away from God and set up idols. God again sent the enemy to attack them. The Midianites and the Amalekites came and camped around Israel. They destroyed all their food supply and livestock, so Israel had no food. Once again, the Israelites cried out to God. God sent them an unnamed prophet who reminded them of the things God had done to deliver them from their enemies in the past. He also told them they had been disobedient once again. Let's read Judges 6, verses 11 to 16. And there came an angel of the Lord and sat under the oak which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joaz the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him, and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles, which our fathers told us by saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. God had sent an angel to speak to Gideon. He and his father were processing wheat in the winepress to keep the Midianites from knowing that they had food. The angel addressed Gideon as a mighty man of valor. When we see how timid and fearful Gideon is, that same statement seems almost foolish. Something we realize from this encounter is that God sees us for our potential, not what we are at the moment. We later see that Gideon came through and was obedient to God. God molded him into the man he wanted him to be. Gideon questions the angel as to why God has allowed them to fall into the hands of the Midianites after all he had done for them in the past. He says God has forsaken them. In verse 14 it says, The Lord looked upon him and said. So was it actually God speaking to Gideon, or was it the angel? Well, God was speaking through the angel to Gideon. The voice was actually the voice of God. God commands him to go in his might, and he will save Israel from the Midianites because God had sent him and will give him the strength to accomplish this task he has given him. Gideon's response is similar to responses by other leaders like Moses when God called them. He says how can he do this? After all, his family's poor, and he's the least among his father's sons. God reassures him that he will be with him, and he shall be successful. Then Gideon says if he has found favor with God, he needed a sign. Gideon asked the Lord to wait until he could go prepare an offering for him, and God assured him that he would wait. Gideon prepared the food, and he brought it back under the tree where he had been speaking with the angel. The angel directed him to place the food on a rock. The angel touched the food with his rod, and it was consumed by fire. Then the angel left. I don't know about you, but that would have been enough for me to realize that God was with me. Gideon realized he'd been speaking face to face with the angel of the Lord. He built an altar and worshiped God. 3 times God had assured him that he would be with him. Now let's read Judges 6, verses 25 to 32. And it came to pass that same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou hast cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cut down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who has done this? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, had done this. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he has cast down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was by it. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will you plead to Baal? Will he save? Will you save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to beneath while it is yet morning. Let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one has cast down his altar. Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he has thrown down his altar. That same night, God told Gideon to take 2 bulls from his father's stock. 1 bull he would use to pull down the altar of Baal his father had built, and the other young bull he would use as a burnt sacrifice to God. Gideon took 10 men who were servants in his household, and he did as God had commanded him to do. He did it at night because he feared his father's household and the men of the city. Apparently Gideon's family was not too poor, because they had servants and they still had some cattle, even though the Midianites had killed the livestock. When the men of the city awakened, they began asking who had done this thing, and learned it was Gideon. They went to his father and they demanded that he be killed. We see from their action how far into idol worship they had fallen to demand killing one of their own in favor of the false god Baal. Gideon's father, Joash, responded, asking the men if they were going to defend Baal, and if Baal would defend them. He told them to call on Baal to defend them. Joash actually defended his son by his actions. He also changed Gideon's name to Jerubbaal, which means let Baal content. Don't you think Joash was probably convicted of his sin of building that altar to Baal? He knew better, and Gideon's actions made him see the truth again. The first step set the stage for Gideon, who was then called Jerubbaal, to be victorious in winning Israel's freedom from Midianite oppression. It reminds us that every victory is actually won by the Lord when we obey his commands. Chapter 6 goes on to describe the familiar story of Gideon being timid when God tells him to confront the Midianites. Gideon put out the fleece and asked God to cover it with dew while the ground was still dry. God complied with his request. Still not satisfied, Gideon put out the fleece and asked God to keep the fleece dry while the ground would be wet. God again complied with his request. Then Gideon amassed an Israelite army of 32,000 men. God commanded him to reduce it to 300 men. Gideon went into battle with the 300 men. God gave Gideon the strength he needed to accomplish God's purpose. They were victorious, and the Midianites turned against each other and killed their own army. God had fulfilled his promise to Gideon that he would protect him and restore Israel. Gideon gave God the credit for saving them in the end and declared God would once again rule over Israel. There had been much discussion in studies past of Gideon putting out the fleece. Some Christians today practice this by presenting some challenge to God to confirm what they believe God is telling them to do. The question is this a legitimate practice to ensure we're hearing what God is telling us to do? And why or why not? One point I wanted to make, the reason that God reduced the number of men from 32,000 to 300, he wanted to prove to the Israelites and to the Midianites that it was his victory.